All right, hey, thanks everybody for being here. I've got with me Rick Kelly, who I had the chance to serve with a number of years ago. Rick is a retired Army First Sergeant, infantry guy, and currently works overall in kind of the cyber industry, and he'll talk more about that in a bit. But Rick, thanks for being here. Appreciate it.
I appreciate you having me. This is I'm overwhelmed with excitement for this. So,
Awesome. Yeah, I'm looking forward to our conversation and kind of bring the viewers up to speed that so Rick and I met years ago back I guess around 2003 at
yep.
the Florida phase of Ranger School. And I'll ask you in a second, talk a little bit about your role there, which is, as I remember, big on day 15. And Rick and I did some work together in the same company and then bonded over our roots in the Massachusetts area. And
That's
this is
right.
when the dynasty of the Patriots, and we've just lost half the audience right there, but when the dynasty of the Patriots was getting full swing, and we would gather to cheer them on. And it's during that time that the Red Sox finally broke the curse too. So lots of good times around the on the playoffs and such. Oh,
There was some good times.
yeah, yeah, and unfortunately, probably over. But if you would just give a little snapshot of kind of as just a lead in, sort of jumping right in of what you did down at 6RTB. In my mind, you were the guy in charge of day 15. I think you might have had another day as well. And for those who have gone through Ranger School, perhaps they now know who to blame for their misery. Or for others, maybe just dial them into like, what was that like? What was this thing? What's Ranger School? What was day 15? What was the significance? All of that.
All right, so kind of get comfortable here. Yeah, so I got to Florida I left Italy in 2002 and came to Florida Ranger Camp, and I got there, and my biggest thing about coming there is I wanted to give back to the community. So um, for many years I had put in at that point, I think I had 12 years in of service, and I wanted to kind of give back. And ever since I graduated school in 19, as a matter of fact, this month, today's March, so this March, it was March of 1993, and ever since then, I always wanted to kind of shape my career, learn as much as I could, be a mentor for a lot of people, and then eventually one day get back to RTB and give back to those that I remember who were my RIs when I was a young private. And I tried always to emulate them, and because they lived the creed every day is the way I saw it while I was there as a young private. And then I always said to myself, one day I want to be able to do the same thing they are and kind of give back. So fast forward to 2002 is when I came into there. As you know, you go in and you're doing observations, you're walking, you're not even allowed to grade anybody because you're going through that probationary period. You're learning all the classes. Thank goodness for Florida, we weren't doing the board, all the boards like Mountains and Benning did. Thank goodness it was a lot informal because you're teaching not only tactics but techniques as well. So you were more you were given more leeway per se. So you didn't have to have this structured, um, you know, training dialogue, I guess per se, verbatim to be able to teach, which was awesome. Um, I'd say probably within my first year, I'd say probably within the first 6 months of being there, had some really good guys. Like you said, you and I are both in Alpha Company. Got there and immediately loved. There were some really old school guys there, and they left probably after about 3-4 months. They were really good at showing us new guys the ropes and what we needed to do and how to be successful, not only in 6RTB, but successful as an NCO overall, and actually as a leader as well, because you're dealing with troops from all around, from every service, as you know. Um, And so you're kind of like that tip of the spear that they're looking at, saying, hey, look, we're being sent to a premier school, and so you've got to be the person that they want to emulate. And so I really took that to heart. Along with my work ethic, I really kind of pushed, I think it was when we first got there, I know him, Stephen Thomas, big guy. He was
Yep.
on the dive
Yeah.
on the dive team for a while.
Yep.
Then he ran the Gator, right?
Yeah.
The Gator Lounge for a while.
Yep. Yep.
He was my platoon sergeant there. So for anybody that is not familiar with the structure in that type of environment, it's all NCOs and officers. Your NCOs are seasoned leaders that came from from all over. There are actually instructors from other branches as well. But anyway, so your structure wasn't like your typical infantry platoon where you've got privates and, you could come in there as a sergeant first class and be a private. It's just, that's the way it is, right? You could come in there as a young captain and be a private, because everybody, it's big boy rules, but at the same time, there were reasons why things were put in place the way they were, which was really good. And the cool thing about it is we all treated each other like peers, no matter what experience level you had. I absolutely loved it because you could wrap your arms around. You didn't have to worry about, you didn't have to so much worry about rank structure. I mean, it was there, but it was more of a family environment, and it was because everybody was so professional. We didn't have to worry about kind of that lack of disciplinary and non-disciplinary influence, I guess, on a lower level enlisted soldiers and whatnot. So, but anyway, so we get in there, and so Stephen Thomas, he kind of took me underneath his wing. He was in charge of day 7 at that point, the planning day, and that was day 7 for anybody that doesn't know. Day 7 is your planning day to go into your FTX. So days 1 through 6 are all of your training days, what we used to call technique week. So where you receive the soldiers day 1, they go in through their classes, they get their reptile orientation, boat orientation. Once again, what they learned in the mountains as far as knot tying, they have to include that down here, doing river crossings and stuff like that. So that entire week, and then as you know, Jamie, you and I, and amongst the other cadre, once they were kind of done with those checkpoints and those fundamentals, we would take them into classes or classroom environments in the outside and teach them tactics from a different perspective. So throughout the first 2 phases that they went through, it was all kind of step by step. But by the time they get to us, it was like bending, crawl, mountains, walk, and then they get to us and they run. And so by the time they get to us, there's a certain level of expectation, and we would teach all those classes to them, but it wouldn't be like teaching, it'd be more technique driven. So we would give doctrinated classes. However, we would insert techniques, and then we would also gather input from those students based off of how they were able to operate as their own platoon entity as they continue to cohort through their plane from bending all the way through. So as they're progressing and they finally get to Florida, we can kind of help them refine and kind of their own SOPs as we go through. But now we're just kind of teaching them basically around the environment, and then they can apply the techniques that we show them, and then they can apply the ones that they've already learned through doctrine, and that was so much fun. And then after about a year and a half, or after about a year, I think Stephen, he moved on to the Gator. He moved on to the Gator, and it was David. Uh, who was the one that took over Alpha One? That was
Oh, Doherty, right? No,
no, Doherty. Mike Doherty was in Charlie. It
but
was
Dave
David.
Doherty. No, Chamberlain.
No. Light skinned. Um, I forget his name. I to this day I can picture him. Real nice guy. Then he took over as platoon sergeant after Steven, and then David and I really hit it off. And he took over. He had day 13, and which was the air assault day. And then so he kind of took me underneath his wing, showed me day 13, and that was when we'd pick the students up from one area, and then we would fly them into an abandoned airfield, and then we would set up, each platoon had different objectives there or target areas, and then they would hit them, conduct a raid, and then move on, get on the birds, and then land back and go into patrol base activities at night.
That's
Right.
red doors, right? The red
What's
door
that?
birds, red door birds.
Yeah, red door for birds. Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
What was it? The pokey birds?
Yeah, yeah. Where it was what, the student pilots out of Rucker, and they'd always bring food with them.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I believe the the old, because as we get there, right? So as you get into, you got to learn about the history of Florida phase of school. You got to learn about the 77 event, the 95 event, with the water temperatures and the levels and what caused the deaths, unfortunately. But then you also learn about the history of the pilots and why they give, the food to the students, because I believe it was like a pilot or something that went down, and it was students that kind of helped out. And then it was their way of giving it back, I guess.
I'd forgotten about that, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was the story. I'm probably messing that up. But,
no, I think, yeah. Yep.
But yeah, so as another year went around, that's when I started to transition into being the PI, or the primary instructor, for both the planning and airborne day, because day 7 was planning, day 8 was the airborne insertion. And then so I took over PI duties for Stephen Thomas for day 7 and 8. And then I took over duties for David on day 13 for the air assault, and absolutely loved it. We actually had a really good company with awesome NCOs. We had some great times. But the times that we had spent there, I know that between you and we also had Sean Umbrell, awesome dude. He was I know you were Alpha 2's PL Walker, and Sean Umbrell was Alpha 1's. Before him, I believe it was, it's either before or after him was Jamie Enos.
Yeah. After, yeah, he came in.
I think he was after, yeah.
Umbrell. Yep.
And then we also had Fosmo, Damian Fosmo as our captain.
Yep.
So, but it was kind of, even though he was kind of a hard ass a little bit, but also learned a lot, because remember how particular he was during these briefings, like for the slides and all that, right? And I was always like, whatever, come on. But thing is, and then I remember working with you to try and get these things to where it would kind of meet his intent, but also at the same time, it was a lot of great professional development for me as well. And then we ended up rocking and rolling on that. And I think we put together a great product, not only for the camp, but the students overall. And then, so day 7 and 8 with the airborne. And then, we also, for day 13, remember, we changed we came up with a new concept for day 13, the air assault. We had changed the venue from one airfield to another because of accommodation and the way we wanted to, based off of the global war on terrorism and the idea that we saw, what we were seeing, what was being brought back from overseas. So remember, Mike Doherty was one of those guys that went on that TDY trip over to
Yeah.
Afghanistan out of there. And then he came back with a lot of lessons learned. A lot of you guys that came down to RTB with a lot of lessons learned. And then we started kind of based off of what was going on overseas, both Iraq and Afghanistan. We started tailoring a lot of the target areas and the missions and the scenarios and the intel driven based off of current operations over there. And so that's when I think we revamped the aerosol day as far as how once the students touch down, what it's going to look like, what kind of resistance they're going to encounter. It wasn't just your standard, when we first got there, it was still kind of Vietnamish per se. I mean, the Op 4 platoon was great, remember, but I remember when I first got there, they were kind of rogue. And then I believe they got in a really good platoon sergeant, remember they got them out to like Hager, right? So before Hager went through the school, and Josh Hager, before he went to the school, he was in the Op 4 platoon, and he always wanted to be an RI. And I remember their platoon sergeant over there would send those guys over to our companies to kind of shadow. And just kind of see what was going on, and before they went to school. And then they would go to school, come through and graduate, and then come back to 6th, and then transition from the Op 4 platoon over to be a walker with us. So, which was awesome. And to see that development was just, that was so exciting, to see. I remember Josh, when he was, I remember when he was in the Op 4 platoon, he was just a young, young kid going, with his so new, and he was so excited. He wanted to come walk with us. And every time we'd walk to the chow hall or we'd walk over to the gator, the Op 4 platoon would be out there, and he'd always flag down and be like, "Hey, when can I come walk with you?" And, I'd be like, "Man, anytime, come on." So, and I'm so glad they were able to do that. And to see him, I think, was it our company he came through before he got to walking with us?
Maybe. I don't remember him as a student. Like, I don't remember when he went through, and it might have even been before I got there. I'm not sure.
It might have been. Yeah. So, I remember when he was a student and he came through, and I don't know. I could swear it was Alpha Company he came through, but maybe it wasn't. I don't know. But I remember him as a student and how just miserable he looked. And I said, "Josh, just keep on moving, brother. Just keep moving. You have goals ahead of you." And he said, Josh, he was like, "Roger that, Sergeant." He's just so happy go lucky.
Take it and run.
Yep. And then when he graduated, it was such a happy day. And then he came back and he ended up getting assigned to us, which was awesome.
We walked, he and I walked a lot, day 15.
That's right. That's right.
Distinctly remember, sitting with him by the side of that road, where you're on the trail, getting ready and all that. And you got your rucksack. It's where the coral snakes, where you got to watch for coral snakes, right? Like, like they tend to be
the little palmetto bushes.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. That's right.
That's where they would hang out at.
Yep. Yeah. I remember actually talking to him about philosophically. I said, I don't think someone should come straight from, be promoted, kind of Op 4, come to be an RI, but kind of go do a unit. And
right.
Then come.
Yep.
I said, kind of like philosophically, that's how I look at it, but like, you're here. And we're gonna make the best of it, and I'm glad you're here, and like, whatever, it's just like, and man, what a pleasure. I mean, always, always a pleasure to walk with him, and just like what he brought of like professionalism and like, and his credit, he just kind of looked at me like, "Yeah, Roger, like, I get it, Roger, and let's go forward." And man, what an amazing guy. And the optimism, like you didn't matter, right? Like it didn't matter. You
Oh,
can't keep him down.
nope. You know, he was the type of guy who would give you the shirt right off his back, even if it was 19 degrees out, you know? So
Yes.
he was that guy.
Yep.
And, you know, uh, yeah, Josh, he was a lot of fun. He really was. Um, you know, but you know, once we heard about that situation, with Josh, I just couldn't believe it. So
Yeah.
just,
Yep.
a little overwhelming.
Yeah. No, for sure. For sure. Um, actually 17 years last month,
Yeah.
which, I remember, I think like that optimism and the way that I thought about it was like larger than life. Like you
Yeah.
just like you couldn't keep him down. And you know, he was both Enos and I were in the unit with him, and it was like
Yeah.
unbelievable. It's like that guy who you never thought would get killed, you know, because he's larger than life.
Yeah.
How, you know? And
Yeah. And you know, exactly. And Josh is just one of many, as we know. I know you and I know so many people in the past that we've worked with, interacted with, that you could probably put that same tag on a
yeah,
lot of them. You
yeah,
know,
yeah,
I know guys that, were in my company in Afghanistan or in Iraq, and you would never would have thought that they would have been the ones going,
yeah,
the ones to you know, you never would have thought they were the ones.
yeah,
And I remember when it happened, it was just it was it's always mind numbing whenever you see anybody go, right? So, but when you're talking about certain individuals within certain positions, you're like, how did
yeah.
that happen? Like what, why, what? And not to mention now you add on the personality of that person, right? So,
Mhm.
like for example, with the company I was in, RXO, Red Schiller, um, personality just like Josh. Oh my God. Um, I remember him as a first lieutenant, and I remember him getting promoted to captain, and while we were over there, and but he was still our XO, and you got to figure it, you know, XO job's probably pretty safe, right?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, you know, but I remember the things that always resonate with me is I had such a great relationship with him, and as a platoon sergeant back then, and him being the XO, and of course, you know, platoon sergeants are always going to the XO and the supply guy. And unfortunately, it was both of them we ended up losing at separate times. And but Rhett, I mean, he was the just like if you take Josh, right, and Josh's happy-go-lucky personality, and you just put captain bars on him, and you know looks a little bit different. They
Yeah.
would just had such, their personalities just exuded happiness. You know, there was this nothing about that would let them get, nothing that would get them down. You
Yeah.
know, and before every mission we'd go out on, you know, because the XO he kind of, you know, as you know, the XO didn't really go out on a whole lot of missions, but he was the backbone of making sure that everybody had what they needed prior to going out, right? So if even if when you come back off mission and you found that you had something that didn't work, or I'm not talking like broken like nods or something like that. I'm talking like, if you needed something that you thought about while you're out on the mission, you come back and be like, hey, you know, XO, we got this idea. How do you think we can, you know, procure this and whatnot?
Yeah.
And he was that guy who'd be like, hell yeah, draw it out for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's do it. And I was like, man, that's awesome. And the number one thing I'll always miss about Rhett is besides his smile and his laugh, he and I always had this thing. So, prior to leaving, no matter where I went, or if I always came, whenever I came back, I'd always greet him, XO. XO, what's up? And then he would get this high pitch, what's up? You know, so it's stuff like that. And then
Yeah.
once you learn that, or once, you lose somebody like that, who you never would have thought in that position would ever
Yeah.
lose, because he wasn't like always directly out there. It was just it was unfortunate. And then our supply guy, Joan Duran, once again, he was from, I want to say he was from Puerto Rico. And he was actually, Duran, myself and John Carson, who was the commander at the time, we went to Duran's funeral. Duran, he's from Boston. And so we went there and met with his family, and he was a huge lover of, or I would say, huge fan, I should say, of Superman. And that was kind of his nickname, because he would always wear a Superman or S on his shirt, right? And but yeah, Duran lost his life, and I guess it was him. It was a freak accident. And so it's the people. Like I said, I'll never suppress the notion that anybody's more valuable than anybody. Nobody is, right? So, but it's those people like the Joshes and the Rets, the Durans, and I'm sure there's a myriad of people that as well that fall in that same tag of, man, that happy-go-lucky people, and you just can't believe like the worst has happened. And it's just, I remember that hitting us to the core when that happened. Yeah, because I remember it was November 15th was John Dennison. He was the first one we lost was John Dennison. He was a lieutenant, PL for I believe it was 1st Platoon, and then the very next day it was Ret. So the 15th and 16th of November of 2006 was rough. Now General Pappas, back then was Colonel Pappas or Lieutenant Colonel Pappas. He was our battalion commander at the time. We had, as there's strict rules of engagement when you're over there, and we had filled that void. We were in Diyala province, and there hadn't been any American presence in Diyala. I want to say, don't hold me to this quote, but I believe it was almost 18 months while everything else was going on. And we got over there, I believe it was July, early August of 06. And so we were kind of going out doing our, I like to call them meet and greets, but they weren't really, they were just showing our presence out there. And, it was the win the hearts and minds, and trying to do the whole, hey, what do you guys need? How can we help? And, I remember rolling it up on different villages and just people wanting to know, why are there Americans here? There were, through our interpreters, there was a lot of villages where they didn't realize that Americans were actually there, because there hadn't been an American presence in Diyala in so long.
Wow.
So some thought Saddam Hussein was still in power, and others were like, what are you doing here? So as far as word being spread, there wasn't a whole lot and it wasn't really the Wild West out there either yet, not yet. It wasn't until I guess once we started making our mark out there, we really didn't have to encounter a whole lot up front. And then, as you work with the IPs a lot, which was the Iraqi police, and then IA, Iraqi Army. And So you're working with them, you're training them, trying to train them in tactics, just skill level 1 stuff, shooting, medical stuff, individual training, buddy team training, fire team training, up to that level. And then, but as we continue to maintain our presence, of course, now, because we were there during the surge and leading up to the surge, as word spread that now Americans are now taking over this area as well. So now you've got infiltrated IPs, infiltrated IA that are being, infiltrated by, right across the border from us, because Diyala butts right up against Iran. And then, so, all that insurgency is now trying to change. They infiltrate in there, but then you've got also families that are being, you got military age males that are now being recruited in there, and being told, if you don't come, work with us, we're gonna do bad things to your family. So, you start to think, I remember us coming back to the FOB and we would talk about that. And I couldn't even imagine. It would be like somebody coming here to our homeland and then trying to convince us, or convince us through lethal force or coercion through our families and say, look, you're going to join our service or your family's going. So one of the two.
Right.
And a lot of those guys had no choice,
Yeah. Right.
And
right.
So, but
I'd forgotten that you were over in Diyala, and I remember hearing about Diyala during that time because I was over in Ramadi, same time period, and that was, from what I heard, it's pretty kinetic.
It was.
Yeah.
It was considered the Wild West at that point, even though we were east, but
right.
It was wide open.
Yeah.
Because we had a platoon in Bakuba or Bakuba or wherever you want to call it. Some call it Bakuba, other calls Bakuba.
Yeah.
Just I want to say it was just east of Baghdad, and the Diyala River Valley. And I remember when we first flew in, you fly in, you get into Warhorse. Warhorse was our transition base when we were doing the right seat rides and all that. And I remember after we were ready to go and we transitioned out, everything was, all TDA equipment was signed over to us. And we ended up, after I think it was a week or two, we ended up moving out to FOB Caldwell, which was out there in Diyala. Like I said, that was the last organization that was out there before us was like an MP unit. And then they left, and it was like almost 18 months before anybody else was out there. And so now you bring in like this, this Rista unit, right? So, which is a mix of both 19 Deltas and 11 Bravos, and, all your meat eaters, and now they want to go out and when we were told that, hey, we're going out to win the hearts and minds, everybody was like, what is that? That's totally opposite of what we ever trained for as infantry guys. We want kinetic stuff, So I remember after 6 months, or no, it wasn't even 6 months. It was so August, September, October, November. So what, 3.5 months before we had our first casualty. And I remember leading up until then, there became a sense of, I don't want to say complacency, but it might have been. I think we just got into the routine of, because we had made so many trips up to Konakeen, which is in the Kurd section up north.
Okay.
I know my platoon did. We did a lot of, we were the ones who stood up. My platoon was charged with standing up the Department of Border Enforcement for Iraq. That was like a joint venture between the U.S. and Iraqi, the two countries. So what we'd do is, because they were having problems at their ports, and they really didn't have a good structure within inside of the IPs, IAs as far as training. So what they did was they come up with a concept was, hey, let the U.S. build what we call the Department of Border Enforcement, and let's put together a school so that way we can train, like a train the trainer school. So
Yep.
that way we met with this Iraqi full bird. He kind of oversaw it on the Iraqi side. John Carson oversaw it on our side, and it was our platoon, myself and Diffenderfer was the lieutenant, and we were charged with putting together the entire curriculum. And nothing was in using no American equipment. So so here we were. It was great. So we got AK-47s and or all your weapons that were over there. Your AKs, PKMs, your AK-74s, AK-47s, anything that they utilized for weaponry, to include pistols. We were able to basically get stuff that from the old missions that we did, right? So when we get out, and we did a lot of they weren't PSD missions. What would they call them? We would just go, remember, because of target intels, you'd go, like kind of you were talking about the laptop, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Right.
So you'd go and kick indoors, collect evidence. It's kind of opposite of today, where we are in civilization, right? So here you got the Fourth Amendment. Over there, it doesn't exist. So if you got intel that somebody was doing some bond making stuff at their Adobe, right? You were kicking in that door. There was no warrants to be had.
Yeah, right.
So what we do is based off of all this intel, and you collect all these weapons. So what we do is take from the pile, right? Make sure that we would take them to the range, and ensure that they worked. We cleaned them all down, everything functions. You just make sure prior to putting a round through it, because remember, some of them were booby trapping the weapons, right? Because remember, they'd put they'd drill a hole into the barrel, and then so that way, if you took a shot, the back pressure would come back and end up kicking back on the firearm. So that was one way that they were doing one of their tactics for getting back at U.S. forces, because they knew that once they were captured, U.S. forces would use the weapons. So what they would do is they would have a stash of weapons at their mud hut, and then what they do is drill holes in the bore in the barrels. So if we used them, it would be like a weapon against ourselves. So what we do is we check all these weapons, and then next thing you know, for about a month straight, I had my team leaders and squad leaders just out there learning everything about the weapons, from just like who we would if you were a private or a brand new, or if you're going through IOBC, you get a weapon, right? You break it down. This is this part, this part, this part. Can you break it down, put it together, do a function check, how to clean it. So everything about the weapon, right? So, and then what I had them do is do marksmanship drills. Because as you know, a lot of over there, those guys don't do marksmanship, right? All they do is point and shoot. So what we did is we found out exactly how you zero those weapons. And because they do have the mechanisms to do it. It's just that nobody ever does it. So we figured all that out. We found some old TMs for those weapon systems, believe it or not. And that was one of the things Red Schiller helped us out with. God rest his soul. But so what we started doing is kind of like on butcher paper, we would draw out like the names of the pieces. And then we'd make structured or standardized like task condition standards. I think it was action condition standards, right? And we'd have all that along with the performance measures and the procedures. Pretty much like we wrote all that, and then we put it on butcher block. And then what we did is we took the interpreter, and what he did is next to the English, he wrote their translation next to it.
Nice.
And I'll get to that in a minute on how it all panned out. But so after about a month, the squad leaders and team leaders going through and becoming like zeroed on, like really proficient, like they're with their own weapons, right?
Yeah.
So they were able to zero these things down to, hitting a gnat's ass.
Yeah.
And we get out there, and then we had guys who specialize, who we had sent prior to going overseas, we sent to EMT courses and stuff like that. As you know, you guys probably did the same thing. And so we had some, not just besides a medic, but we had guys that could assist the medic in curriculum with that.
Yeah.
And then, and then myself and like one other squad leader wrote the entire curriculum for small unit tactics, anywhere from individual to buddy team to fire team. And that was the highest we went, was fire team. And then, so the concept with this and the way we did all this is, once we got approved, because we had to pitch it to the company command and all that too, and have our interpreter go through everything as well. It was really good. And then we went up there, we got our first class. And I remember we got down on the range. So we were doing the marksmanship, and we took their AKs away from them, right? So, it's kind of like, hey, thanks for showing up, but can I have that weapon real quick? So, and we would put those somewhere else, but we had the ones that we had confiscated before as training aids now. And so we set those up on sandbags along that 25 meter range that we had built. And then, we'd set up US targets, we'd set up the zero targets, right? Because we practiced on those. And so we told, we asked them, hey, who's your best shot, right? And then, and they were like, hey, so-and-so is, like, okay, well, get him down here and see if he can hit that black thing, right? Boom, doesn't even hit the paper, and we're like, and he's like, oh yeah, I got it right there. No, there's no mark right there. So we get one of our, and then after he shoots probably about 7, 8, 9, maybe a dozen rounds, he's all over the place. I think maybe 3 rounds hit the paper, somewhere on the paper, nowhere near the black. And then they started taking the excuse of, well, this isn't meant to, be a precise weapon, they were making all the excuses. So I said, okay, hold up right there. I said, grab one of my guys who was like eagle eye Ed, on with the AK, deadly with it, right? I said, watch, he's gonna shoot that and hit it right in the circle. And they're like, no way, no, can't do it, can't be done. And they couldn't believe it, right? So he gets down there and he shoots, and of course, right through the circle. And they were like, what kind of wizardry is that? It was so funny. I mean, it was just mind blown. And so once we showed them that, yes, we can do that with your weapon. Now we're going to show you how we did that.
Yeah.
And we're going to be able to get you to that level. Yeah. And from that point on, they were like, so attentive to us. Yeah. Like they were like, oh my God, because at first they were really skeptical.
Right.
And, as far as like, oh, these guys here, they think they're better than us, they're going to do all this. But at the same time, in their own beliefs, they didn't think that their equipment was good enough to be able to do the things that we could do with it. And once we proved that to them, I think we earned their trust at that point. Yeah. And a lot of your basics can come out of, like, say, something as something as small as marksmanship, Yeah,
right. Right.
And then we started getting, we grabbed their guy that had done like real life trauma before, with, when a bongo truck got blown up, one of the guys was there, and so he had hands-on at one point of collecting body parts, but also like putting tourniquets on his buddy's legs. So we deemed him as the medic, and then we got our medic along with our guys to grab him and a couple others to become proficient at medical tasks. Yeah. So we started building this, and like I said, it was a train the trainer environment, and we ended up graduating, I believe, 18 out of, like, I think we started off with, I think it was like 35 to 50. Okay. And of course, as you know, you know, you got the willing and able, the willing and
Right.
unable, unable and willing, you know, but they met all the criteria, you know?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and, but we ended up with 18 good people, that could take into the future the protection
Sure.
for the country of Iraq. So,
Yeah.
which was
Yeah.
really good.
Yeah. It's awesome. It's
Yeah.
awesome. Want to fast forward to when you retired,
Yeah.
and I know you did some contract work initially for a bit, and then went into law enforcement and then into another career. If you could talk a little bit about just that decision to go into law enforcement, like what drew you in, and then how did that go? Yeah.
Sure. Um, so yeah, I'll start like kind of at the transition of when I got out.
Yeah.
So I had planned on staying in longer than 20 at one point, but in 2009, and I'll try and make this portion quick because it leads me into why I got out. So in 2009, as you know, like my 20 years was coming up in 2010. The year prior, you're eligible to put in your retirement paperwork, right? I didn't really have an intention to do that just yet because a lot of my peers were already wearing the wreath already, or they had just got picked up on the last list for the Sergeant Major. So let me clarify that.
Yep.
And then, so unfortunately, my last duty station, I should say, I always say I started off with unfortunately, but as an infantry guy, that's what I said back in 2008 when I was leaving to come here to Fort Jackson. But it was overall, and I have to end that portion of it with, it was a rewarding experience. I can tell you that. So anyway, so here it was. There was a buddy of mine. We were both first sergeants together when I first got here in 2008, and we worked really well together. First Sergeant Austin. The next year, he made Sergeant Major, and then he went right into Command Sergeant Major, and he ended up going to Korea. And so in 2009, I was eligible for the Sergeant Major board coming up in April of 2010. And I remember Austin had sent me an email, and he said, "Hey man," he goes, "I'm sitting on the board this year." And he goes, "I know that you're ready to take over that position, or, you know, to move on. So," he goes, "I'd really like to have you put your packet together and get it in there." Because as you know, a lot of the stuff is while you're in, and even while you're out. So we can talk about that too, but is networking, right? So Austin, great guy, told me about that, and I was like, okay, that sounds good. So October 1 of 2009 is when the Army changed its requirements for Sergeant Major. You couldn't be a CSM for 5 years after getting pinned. You had to do 5 years of staff time. However, you could compete. I think it was after 2 or 3 years for CSM, but it was they made it so where you couldn't just go right into CSM. Where a lot of my buddies, my peers, went in right into CSM right after they pinned their star, right?
Yeah.
So. And I was like, I'm not waiting around like that. That's going to set me way behind everybody. I'm not doing that. So that's when I decided to retire. And I was like, I'm done. I didn't have a plan. I really didn't.
Yeah.
I just knew that I was done. It wasn't the same military as I joined when it was in 1990. And that's generational. That's going to happen with anybody that spends so long. And so when I got out in 2010, I remember speaking with you, or prior to me getting out, I think it was in October timeframe. I remember you would give me a call and say, "Hey, what's your plan for?" Or actually, no, I think you came to Fort Jackson.
Oh yeah, that's right.
And you met me in my office when I was still a first sergeant. And
forgot about that. Yeah. That's right.
because I couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
I was like, oh my God, what are you doing here? Because I remember walking in the office. I think I was in a meeting at battalion, and I came back, and some of the drill sergeants that were in there were like, hey, some civilian guy was here looking for you. I'm like, what? Like, whatever. So I go in my office, and then next thing you know, like you popped in like a little bit later, and I was like, oh crap, I didn't even know. So yeah, so thank goodness, thank God, because I honestly think that I wouldn't be where I am today without you reaching out to me and getting me connected with Previous and moving on. So kind of moving forward with this conversation. So getting out, working with Previous, kind of working with you on the small group leadership stuff, you and Jason, for a few months. Jason,
Korzinski.
no,
Well, Beefley.
Beefley, Jason
Yep.
Beefley,
Yep.
and then Sergeant Major Stewart,
Yeah.
out of
That's
West
right.
Point. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, doing those, and then we had the AUSA conference with Justin as well. But I remember working that, but then Jason reached out to me, Torsinski, about the Tiger program. It really sounded interesting, and I absolutely loved it. Transitioning to being embedded with units to be able to help out with unit commanders and their planning, counterinsurgency planning, utilizing that tool.
Yeah.
That's something that I had never had while, I wasn't fortunate enough to have that tool while I was in.
Yeah. Yeah.
And once I saw that, I was like, this is a game changer for troops on the ground.
Yep.
And I was really passionate about it. So that was so much fun. Did that for, closed out Iraq in November of 11, went straight over to Afghanistan until June of 12, supporting that mission. And then, come back and spending a year long on the professional ethics for the company commander and first sergeant course, which was great. That was fun. It had its trials and tribulations, but it was fun. And then finished up contracting, taking over. I was a DPM, or deputy program manager, for counter IED operations in Afghanistan with Joe Meglin. And he was the program manager, but I was the one who actually deployed downrange. I ended up recruiting like 29 other people, 6 special operations guys, and the rest were EOD guys, because it was a counter IED op. So, but it was also an EOD op as well. And then for the special ops program in Afghanistan. And it was after running around the Middle East for so long and doing contract work for so long that my wife was like, hey, it's time to come home. It's time to do something else. And I didn't know what else to do because I was still stuck in the military mindset. That's all I knew. And so I asked her, I said, well, what am I going to do? I mean, where else am I going to put my skills at? And she says, well, why don't you come home and take a look at the sheriff's department? And I was like, I always told myself, I was always intrigued by law enforcement. I always told myself, after working overseas and not having to wear a uniform anymore, I really got grown accustomed to that. I remember when I first got out and I was wearing like a sport jacket with you and going on those things. It was kind of a weird transition for me because I wasn't used to that. And so, yeah, joined the sheriff's department, and I think it was more of a sense of serving still, versus just coming home and being the Walmart greeter. Nothing wrong with that. It's just that I was still in that mindset of I need to continue to serve, and serve with people with the same type of mentality, that would understand what mission is, dedicated to it, and their work ethic. And I saw that within that uniform in that realm. So that's why I selected that. I figured, well, I got military skills, maybe they'll take me. And fortunately I did. I worked 2 years patrol on the road, and then at 43 years old back then, I was the old guy. And the thing is, though, my wife's like, they had tryouts for the SWAT team. And I was like, man, I'm going to leave that in the rearview mirror. That's for the young guys, right? So but word had gathered around about my military background and, stuff I had done overseas, with the programs and stuff. And so the captain over the operations division sent me an email. He says, you need to apply. So I did. It was about 11:30 at night. It was due at midnight. It was about 11:30 at night. And so I sent the letter of intent, and he immediately said, send out the application or fill out the application, send it to me within 5 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I did that. And for 6 years, my last 6 years in the sheriff's department, I spent on the SWAT team. And
Oh,
I think a year of it was on a part-time team. Like I was still on the road, in road duties, but like you respond to incidents and stuff. But I think I spent about almost 5 years on the full-time team,
wow.
and I absolutely loved it. But thing is, though, as I got older, you get wiser, and your body starts breaking down, and you got to find something else that that you can do that's non-kinetic.
Yeah.
So I took an interest because, well, in kind of going back, Jamie, when I was working the Tiger program, one of the things that really I found fascinating about that is when I was working with the software and the hardware, um, whether our development team was in Bagram, and so I was responsible for all of RCEs. So whatever the client was, whatever unit that I was dealing with and whatever tweaks they needed, I would fly back to Bagram and let the developers know and all this, right? So that they would burn like an image for these servers. And so instead of just me taking like regular, hard drives, they would fill entire server blade servers, right, with these drives. And here I am like tying the handles of these blade servers, right, with 550 cord and stringing them around my neck. And at one point I had like 4 blade servers on my body. And that's including like, my overnight pack and everything else. And here I am getting on helicopters, flying out of Bagram out to, Jalalabad and,
Yep.
down to Phoenix in Kabul. And, and here I was, but the thing is, my point is, it made me so diverse that here I was as a guy that was focused for so long on doing nothing but tactics and focused on left, right, left, and decimating the enemy. And then here I was kind of learning a new trick to the trade, but also helping out unit commanders. So I would take these servers and I'd get on site in the S6 shops, and God love them, the S6 personnel, the officers in there, they would just look at me and be like, yep, Tiger, come on in, like, cool, man, I got these servers. They're like, you need help? So I'd put them in. But the thing is, though, I'd have to take what I learned at the time was a KVM, which was because everything was being done in DOS or command line at that time. KVM being, keyboard, video and mouse handle that you put the servers in and then you hook them up, because servers don't have a face like a computer, right? So you use that thing. And here I was, I'm on my burner phone, talking to Bagram, saying, and he's walking me through the process. And here I am setting up these servers, making sure we got connectivity between wherever I'm at, back all the way back to Bagram. So that way, when they do patching and all that, the stuff can, we have good connectivity. But it was even more than that, because there was times where I went and remember, because I would fly into Kuwait. They had pulled out their program for whatever reason. And then I remember Jason give me a call one night and says, hey, I need you. And Alexis Young was the PM at the time. And he was on a call with myself and Alexis. And he goes, Rick, you need to go to Kuwait, because for whatever reason, somebody just blew up that program and they no longer want it. And I'm like, oh, that's not going to happen. The troops coming over here need to know how to use it.
Yeah.
But anyway,
right.
So that's all that stuff there helped transition to me where I'm at today. So, so back in 2020, I found out that after I retired, and that's another thing, another downfall is retirement services, right? So I think we talked about that briefly
Yeah.
between myself, you, Drew.
Yeah.
And it was back then in 2009, 2010 timeframe. It was horrible. Back then is also when they told you, oh, you prior to getting out, if you want to transition your GI Bill benefits to your kids, now's the time to do it, right? And I was like, okay, cool. I'm doing that. I'm going to transition
Yeah.
everything over to them because I don't need it, right? Whatever. I'm a meat grinder. I'm a meat eater.
Yeah.
I don't need
Right.
that. So, fast forward to 2020, my son is getting ready to go to St. John's University in New York. And here I am thinking, cool, I'm just going to call the VA and because I already got a confirmation that he was going to get 18 months. My daughter would get 18 months. And I called the VA. I'm like, hey, my son's going to St. John's. I want to be able to activate these benefits for him. They're like, I don't know what you're talking about. And I'm like, what's that now? And they were like, yeah, you had to have done 4 more years in order for him to be able to get it. I'm like, nobody told me that.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, the transition people were telling all the retirees to switch your benefits over. And I said, I even have a printout here confirming from the VA that it's been, transitioned.
Yeah.
And so anyway, long story short, he couldn't use the benefits. I had to the benefits remained with me. So I'm like, well, I'm not going to let him go to waste. I loved what I was doing with the Tiger stuff. I knew I couldn't do any more kinetic stuff with the SWAT team anymore, just because my body was getting tore up. Plus up here was a lot of stuff was coming back. I was coming home angry at night, and that'll segue probably into the next portion. And then, so I decided, you know what? I'm gonna set my career path forward. I'm gonna get into cybersecurity, because once again, it's another mode of protection. And I'm continuing to serve, but I'm also serving is also protecting. So I've been doing that since I was 18 years old. And that's all I knew how to do, is to be able to help people out, to serve, and to help be able to hopefully create that nice bubble so people can sleep peacefully at night. It's like one of my favorite quotes, is from Edmund Burke,
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
About the whole,
Sleep peacefully in your beds at night.
yeah. So
rough men stand ready. Yeah.
Yeah. The only way to defeat evil is for good men to do nothing. I'm just paraphrasing.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
I wish I had it in front of me, but it's one of my favorites. But I've always lived by that, along with the Ranger Creed, as you know. And so you never want to accept failure. And so I was like, you know what? I want to be able to continue to serve. And how can I do that? And I have benefits. Cybersecurity is the way to go. And it's the way of the future. So I got into that in 2020, finished up my degree in December of this past year. And now I'm in my graduate program for ethical hacking and penetration testing. So absolutely love it. This time now I'm focused in my graduate studies in offensive security, trying to get into the adversarial mindset, and that'll help me protect systems even better.
Yeah.
So,
wow. That's awesome. And I think, just listening to you and thinking about how we don't know often in the moment, like how the pieces are going to fall back in place later,
Yep.
And then, there it was, and like the opportunities in front of you, but also that seed had been planted in Tiger to say, this is something that I take to, right. I have an interest in, and then it,
who'd have thunk it, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yep. What would you say to those who have served and maybe are still trying to figure out what next is, right? And like you had, as did I, like a couple of nexts.
Yes.
Right. And some turns and kind of navigating that. But like, what would you say for those that maybe have only see a certain number of limited options, or they don't know what they don't know, or they're just maybe even just getting started?
Yeah. You kind of hit that point right on the head. Here I am, I'm going to be 52 this year. And I think now in life, I've found my niche, and and it took a long time to do that. You know, there was a lot in between after leaving out of the military up until now. As you know, it wasn't just changing of jobs. It was a lot of mental health stuff that you got to deal with as well. Um, so I think some of the advice would be reach out, network. Obviously, start within inside your own organization. Thank goodness, you know, I tell my wife this all the time. Thank goodness for yourself and Joe Meglin. The three of us, you know, we all work together down in Florida. But one thing I always tell people is, and the same thing I tell my older son, who just graduated, like I said, graduated from St. John's, and now here he is trying to find. He wants to be a sports agent, so here he is trying to find sports management positions. But I always tell him, I said, look, you know, no matter what you do in life, people are always going to remember your work ethic, and as long as you're true to yourself and you work hard and you make the right connections, you'll be set up for, you know, for success. And what with that success, it matters. It depends on what you do with it. So I would say for anybody that's still in and transitioning, it may take you a while, but start with while you're in. Start with your work ethic, with what you're doing. People remember that. They remember who they are. You true to yourself and true to them. And then at the same time, if like me, I never would have thought I would have got into cybersecurity. It took many years to figure that out. But if you still have, you know, if you want to be an entrepreneur, if you have great ideas, go with it. Figure it out. Start your research now, and make those connections. LinkedIn is a great tool. I have found that, especially nowadays with the position I'm in right now. It's great to network on LinkedIn. You know, you may not know them, but hey, it's that professional network, and you shoot them a note and say, hey, I'm interested in what you got going on. Can you tell me a little bit more about it? Don't be afraid to reach out to people. You know, don't just surround yourself in your own little circle. Reach out beyond your comfort zone. I'm looking to start up. This is, I know, Jamie, this is going to be new for you as well. I just got approved on Monday, this past Monday. I have a concept. I want to start my own company, and
Nice.
I just applied to the state of South Carolina last week for my own LLC, and
Nice.
I got
Congrats.
approved on Monday.
Yeah.
And so, my thing is, I don't see this thing taking off until 2025, 2026, but I have aspirations and I have more research to do. So research is what my driving point for anybody that's transitioning is network and research. Those networks will come in handy, and your research, get smart on whatever it is you want to do. Even if you don't know what you want to do, if you have an interest in something, try it out.
Yeah.
You're not going to know unless you try. And, you know, when I was getting out, you asked me to, you know, come out and do leadership stuff. I never would have thought in a million years I'd be doing something like that. You know, I was like, oh God, I just want to leave, you know, that stuff behind. But thank goodness I did, because everything happens for a reason, and I'm a firm believer in it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
You mentioned some of like the head stuff and things that kind of go on in transition, and I think I shared with you for myself. I remember a conversation with a friend, and this was immediately after I had finally done an intake with a organization that served very specifically veterans with mental health, etc. And it was an intake that was like, okay, but when I hung up the phone, the thought that went through my head was like, wow, there's actually a place for me, like where I qualify, because I'd done all these things of like, well, you know, I haven't seen what some guys have seen, or I didn't experience this, or I don't have this, like all these reasons like that I don't qualify, if you will.
Sure.
And I remember relaying that to my friend, and he said, you know, it's funny because kind of like you should know better, given all like the study you've done and psychology and all this
Right.
stuff, like it shouldn't have, like it shouldn't have taken you 10 years, right? Like after getting out to finally like, hey,
Right.
maybe I should, right? And he
Yep.
said, think of like all that you knew and all like, and the obstacle that it was with all that knowledge for you. He said, think about the rest of us that don't have all that knowledge and experience that you did, and how hard it is for us to get to pick up the phone, to walk through the door. So
It's very hard.
curious, your own experience, as much as you want to share, of just kind of that journey that I think a lot of us are on, and a lot of guys are still at that point of like, hey, I don't even know how to think about whether I would even be interested in broaching that topic, right?
Right. Yeah. So, I could go on with this for a long, long time. As far as like the starts and everything else, like your upbringing and,
Mhm.
and, your mindset. I wouldn't say, the upbringing in a negative sense, your mindset. So,
Yeah.
as you grow, like for me, and this is just me, I grew up in a very tough household, a very good, it was very good household, middle class, Irish Catholic family, which, but a very strict upbringing. My dad always, he was hard on myself and my brother, but it made me who I was, who I am today. And, but who I was all the way up until I was 18, and the military kind of helped refine it. So, um, so with that being said, there was a certain level of expectation I had for not only myself, but for everybody else as well, because I was taught a work ethic very early on, a very tough one. This is what you must do. You need to continue to drive forward. And that's when I joined the military, it was still the same mindset. I absolutely loved it. And that's why I'm so proud of a lot of my accomplishments while I was in, because I think that was a huge driving force. The military just refined it. However, as we're talking about the mental health, you're in, I don't care if you're in 4 years, 8 years, 20 years, 30 years, there are things that you're going to see and do that are, you don't realize at the time, how they're going to affect you. But also, you hit another key point on the head for those people out there that say, hey, I'm tough as nails, nothing's going to get me down. I was one of those people. I'm sure you were one of those people. There's no way. I'm never going to go see anybody. I'm fine. There's nothing wrong with me. I'm just hard headed. I have a different mindset than everybody else. I'm strong willed. I don't need to go see a shrink. I don't need help. I don't need this and that. You battle that for years. You don't realize it, but you do. And you're right. Everybody has different experiences. Some guys, I mean, there are guys that, on 12, 24 deployments, some with 0, some with 1, some with, just a couple. It doesn't matter how many deployments you've been on. There is stuff that affects you, whether it be toxic leadership environments, the way you were developed as a young supposed leader, training environments where you've seen awful things happen or things have happened to you. Like for example, I've got metal in 3 parts of my body, and 2 of them are from training, believe it or not, from grenade shrapnel from training. A third one is in my right arm, and that's from in Iraq. And then also to witness somebody die in front of you in training, non-wartime, is when they're right in front of you, and then next thing you know, they're gone. You don't think about this stuff. At the time, you're just like, oh man, another one down. It sucks, but that's the nature of the beast of the job, and an infantry guy, and you just suck it up and drive on, because that's what your leaders tell you to do. Take a knee, face out, drink water. I try to make a, I try to make
Change your socks, maybe. If you have time.
maybe change your socks, whatever. But, and then as time goes on, then, you start losing, people that you were really close with, in, um, throughout your time in service, and even after service, um, people that that have taken their own lives. And this whole time, there's a flame burning inside of you and you don't even know it. You're a ticking time bomb. And I remember getting to a point where I was drinking heavily, because that would satisfy my, um, I guess that was more of like a reliever for me. I didn't realize why. I was just drinking all the time. And my wife, she was tired of it. I was very edgy. I was always on edge. Constantly, I would snap. It doesn't matter. If something was just out of place, I would lose my mind. Um, for example, as you're overseas, right? You're convoying, you're moving. You're always told, strap everything down in your vehicle, right? Because if anything happens, you don't need, to become collateral damage, because that ammo can back there, is now going to come flying forward and take somebody out. And, so you become so ingrained in that, and it's just little things. So like, that's not even a major thing. It's a little thing, but those little things add up. And I found myself like driving down the street with my family, and this isn't yesterday, this is years ago, but in this kind of moves to my point of how it all builds up and builds up and builds up. My son had like a water bottle, and it was on the floor in the back seat. And every time I'd turn, like the whole thing would like roll and hit the door or come over. And it just triggered. It was those triggers for me, that even something that little, that, oh, it's not tied down. Why is that not secure? If something happens, I don't need, and it was just that whole like rattling of something loose. I'm just using that as an example. Those are just small fine print triggers. I mean, there are other triggers for other things. I got to a point where it was hard for me to be out in public. I don't know why. I just started feeling super anxious. Just whatever happens to you over the years, it does compound. I remember when I first joined the sheriff's department in 2015, when you go through your 3 months of training in-house, one of the things that they do is they show you the mental health crisis with law enforcement officers, and it obviously same resonates with military veterans, right? And they're saying a lot of law enforcement officers get out after 5 years because it's around the 5-year mark is when they start to have mental issues based off of the things that they encounter and everything else. And it builds up over time. And I remember sitting there watching that video, and I'm thinking to myself, with all the things I've been through in my life, no, that's not gonna be me. That's ridiculous. And so we kind of talk about, and you kind of mentioned it, it compounds over time. You don't even know it. And until it affects your family or somebody that you love, and they point it out, but my wife spent many years trying to figure out how to point it out without me snapping.
Right.
Because I would be that guy, and so finally, a couple of the buddies of mine on my team, they were going through the same thing, believe it or not. And we all kind of went and saw it. We reached out to somebody ourselves. And I'll never forget. I mean, that was probably one of the best things I ever did. I've always been a very personable person. I never talked about my personal life. I think, a lot of the things I've been through, kind of help aided in my first unsuccessful marriage. So because of my mindset, and then I didn't want to see that happen to my wife now. We're together forever, and thank goodness for her. She did a lot of recognizing of stuff that I didn't see. And so when I went and I immediately reached out to our PCM, met with her, and she referred me to somebody because she said, I don't specialize in what you have going on. But she goes, I empathize with you because I do have patients that are in the same boat, but I can refer you to somebody. And she did. And the hardest thing for me, Jamie, I think, was the very first visit.
Yeah.
Um, to identify that you actually have something going on.
Yeah.
I remember in that first visit, I broke down. I'm not a crier. I'm not, I've never been, but let me tell you something. Just the overwhelming sense of being able to kind of exhale your story to somebody, and let it out was a huge relief. Because all the stuff I kept in for so long, all the hardships I've endured, trying to figure out why stuff was compounding, and why is it hitting me all at a head right now? Why?
Yeah.
And you always hear, as you always hear that it comes, PTSD doesn't come at you like right when it happens. There's always, it could be a month, it could be a year, it could be 20 years from now. And for me, it finally came to a head for me probably almost 11 years after I got out. And it wasn't because the changing of jobs or anything like that. I mean, it might have been little stresses here and there, but I loved what I was doing. So it wasn't like I was miserable at what in my job. I was still serving a purpose to the community. I absolutely loved it. I think it just, the way the doctor explained it, he said, hey, it's, there's a lot that you went through in your life, and it's finally coming to a head. And I'm, and one of the best things I could have done for remedy is come and see him. I was heavily drinking at the time as well. And he actually helped me get through that. And then also prescribed me some stuff that I'm still on today that helps me get through my daily life. I'm not ashamed about that. I've always been one of those guys that was, no, it's like that, suck it up and drive on, right?
Yeah. Right.
Hey doc, I got a femur sticking, my femur's sticking through my skin.
Some
Here,
Motrin.
take some Motrin.
Yeah.
I got a compound fracture. Take some Motrin.
Motrin.
That's the way I've always been, is that mentality. And
Yeah.
whatever, you suck it up and drive on. The mission's first. Everything else is last. That's it.
Yeah.
And it carried with me outside the military, and it came to a head. And once I get on, once I get onto that system, and now I'm not ashamed to mention it. It was a huge relief to get off, a big weight to get off my shoulders. I spent 2 years, 2 years going through mental health counseling, and there was some good times and there was some rough times, but it was well worth it in the end. And anybody, the one thing I would say is, anybody that feels like they can't talk to anybody, please, you can. I was always that naysayer. There's no way, I'm not letting anybody know what my feelings are.
Yeah.
You have
Right.
to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for that, Rick. It's powerful. I'm trying to find it on my phone real quick, but there's a quote I noticed at the VA here in Phoenix, and I want to get it right, but if I don't find it, I'll just quote it as is. But it essentially says, the costs of service are evident here.
I'm sorry, what was the last part?
It's like, the costs of service are on display here.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
it's like, I'd been going to the VA for like however many, months, years, whatever. And one day I kind of looked up, it was behind the front desk. I'd never
Yeah.
noticed.
It is
And I
here
was like,
also in Columbia as well.
yeah. And I was like, wow, that's, I think that's the piece that, it's not in the briefing when you join or when you exit, right? Of like, there's a utility to the mindset of like, here's some motion, drive on, right? Because it's
Right.
like mission first, and like when you're talking like war and existential threat to a nation and like all this, it's like it serves a purpose, but like
Yes.
there's a cost to that. And like you don't really get the clear debrief of like how it's appropriate to then like attend to the thing
Yeah.
afterwards, right? And it's like it's which is funny because in like maintenance, you get that training, right? Like you have a piece of equipment, and after
Yep.
you take it to the range, you clean it and you break it down,
Yes.
you make sure it's ready for the next thing. We're not so good at doing that for like this piece of equipment.
Right. Yep. The internal mechanisms.
Yeah. And at some point, you use the weapon long enough and don't clean it, right?
Yep. Yep.
And
What
it
does it
breaks
do?
down.
It becomes inoperable.
It becomes inoperable. And it's appropriate. And I think that's one thing I've seen for myself, for others, is like once you're done with your service, and like kind of like you said earlier, whether that's like, a couple years, 4 years, 20 years, 30 years, right? Like the mission, that portion of the mission is over. And in a large part, the mission's now like you.
Yeah.
And that's hard because we're so used to that serve mindset, right?
Yeah.
And it's externalized. Like I give myself for the mission. It's like, well, now like the mission's you. And it doesn't even have to be just for you. It can be, but it's like it's you've got to be maintained for the sake of your family. You've got to be maintained for the sake of like your
Absolutely.
long-term well-being, right? You've got to be maintained to be useful elsewhere, right? And
Yep.
it's time to do that full level, what do they call it, like level 3 maintenance or whatever, right? When it goes all the way back, you don't even know where it is.
Yeah.
The manufacturer. I don't even.
Yeah. What's that depot level?
Yeah, right. Exactly. I don't know. We might see it in a year, right? Like,
Yeah.
but it's hard to believe that when your brain has been so conditioned for you give any whatever it takes to accomplish the mission, and don't worry about your knee or your toe or your head or whatever,
Yeah.
but it needs to
Yep.
be, yeah.
No, you hit that right on the head. It's you got to take care of yourself for long term because the mission is there. And one of the things I told one of my coworkers here currently in this job is, you know, you got to take care of yourself.
Yeah.
It's one thing I've learned over the years. It was hard to get to that point, but you have to take care of yourself because there's always a one person up.
Yeah.
We always used to say one man up, but now
Yeah.
it's 2024, so we're going to say one person up.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but everybody's replaceable.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
mission is there, so don't get overwhelmed and get too into your mission to
Mm.
where it's going to affect not only you but the people that your loved ones, because they're the ones who are going to be there forever,
Mm.
or for the rest of your life. So we used to say that in the military, but it was always like you just kind of dismiss it. Mission. I think the motto was what? Mission first, family always,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Right.
But I know personally, I didn't
Right.
follow that.
Yeah.
I'm sure you were in the same boat, and
Yeah.
I'm sure
No,
everybody
same.
else who served was in the same boat. But
Yeah.
yet it was always preached, mission first, family always. You would see that when you walk into like battalion headquarters, it'd be like up on
Right.
the wall, but is it really?
Yeah.
Is it really?
Right. Yeah.
What's so
I I think I've heard the analogy too. I think it's like fitting for anyone that's flown commercial, right? It's the whole like put your oxygen mask on first and then help the people around you, right? And it's like, and or like in lifeguarding, right? Like you're not going to save the drowning person if you're also drowning, right? Like it's just like, so if you want to be helpful to society, to your family, whatever, like it is kind of important to be okay,
yes.
like
Yep.
that actually, that's how the math works.
Yeah. Yeah. If you want to be around another day to
Yeah.
be able to help your family out, you've got to take time for yourself as well. Because as you know, there are guys and that you and I know that aren't here because of their own hand.
Yep.
Um, you know, that was one of the hardest things for me to tell somebody. When I told the doctor that there were times when I didn't feel like I needed to be here anymore. Um, you know, if I got frustrated with something, whether it was with my family or um, you go from a sense of what you think is normalcy to, you know what does it matter? I'll
Yeah.
just take my own life and I'll just, that way the problem goes away, you
Yeah.
know? But then I always, you know, then you come back to reality and you think "Well, the problem doesn't go away. It compounds for everybody else, you
Yeah.
know? And
Yeah.
then you just, so you fight to live another day. And, you know, and that's kind of what I was taking day by day at a time, you know, with those 2 years with the counselor, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. No, and I get that. I can remember, I remember a conversation in a parking lot, a friend of mine and I, where we were talking about for each of us, those thoughts, and almost it's like this almost like a sick fantasy where you're like, it'd just be easier,
yeah,
right? Which to your point, rationally, objectively isn't true. But in the
yeah,
moment you feel that, right? It becomes this like you know, well, a sick fantasy. And
yeah.
it's not
It's
reality.
absolutely. At the time, like you said, you kind of go through that and you're like, well, you know, I'd be better off.
Yeah.
But then what you're being selfish. And but nobody else around you, like if you have a family, they're not going to be better off.
Yep.
It's gonna, if you, especially if you have children as well.
Yep.
Now what your actions just took are going to affect them for the rest of their lives.
Yep.
So, you know,
And even, you know, and if you don't have a family, you still, and this I think is sometimes hard in those moments to believe, like there are still people that care about your existence,
yeah,
and it doesn't help them either, you
yeah,
know, and it compounds, to your point. It
yeah.
compounds.
I mean, think about this. So, like you said, even if you don't have family, there are people out there. Like, you know, you and I will go years, right? We've gone years without, you know, just communicating, but we don't forget about each other, you know. And then once we get on, you know, you shoot each other a text
Yep.
or you get on something like this, and it's like, you know what? I do have people out there that care about me, you know, because
Yep.
we're still communicating. We can pick back up. You know, you
Yep.
and I have known each other for over 20 years, you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
and we can, you know, we've worked together in a few different capacities, but we don't, geographically, we're so separated and we don't communicate every day, but yet we can pick up just like this.
Right where
And
we
I
were.
wish more veterans um, could think like that as well. You know, say, look, you know, I've worked with people, you know, and I wish I get, you know, maybe if I get a hold of somebody, so and so, you know, just having that 5 minute conversation can make a huge difference with somebody
Yep.
and their
Yep.
mindset.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I well, I found it.
the price of freedom is visible here. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
on the Columbia VA as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's for very, very big words right there. And as far as the concept, it's absolutely
Yeah.
true.
Profound.
Yeah,
Profound.
huge.
Yeah. Well, Rick, I appreciate your time. Thanks for taking time. Thanks for sharing like very openly. I believe like you do, from the, whether it's just connecting with people, you know, or it's hearing about others who have been in our shoes or similar situations. It's like, hey, none of us is going the journey alone, right? And
Yeah, absolutely.
that's huge. So thanks for sharing, and talk soon. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Jamie. I appreciate it.